I think we're ready to start. Hello, everybody. My name's Gabrielle Trainor, and I'm the lucky person who's been the chair of the Construction Industry Culture Taskforce since it was set up. I'm on land in a part of Sydney known as Barangaroo, named for one of the most inspiring Indigenous women whose history that we know about here in Sydney. So I'd like to acknowledge Barangaroo, and I know you all join me in acknowledging all First Nations people across Australia, wherever we are, and we pay respects to Elders and all First Nations people, especially those who may be on this webinar with us today. We, of course, value and respect the deep connection that you have to country and recognise that your custodianship and knowledge underpins the identity and sustainability of this land. So with that, welcome to all of our attendees across Australia. We're absolutely thrilled to have over 600 people, so many, registered with us, and thank you all for the interest in this project that began back in 2018 with a small group of people trying to make an important industry even. I think it's true to say that we now have huge momentum, and I think that's manifest from the large attendance that we have today. Thank you. A bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, and we will later send out a summary with the slides and post the recording and probably an edit of the recording, unless you would like to sit through another hour and a half on our website. As for questions, we welcome them very warmly. So please put your questions in the Q&A function anytime, and we'll answer as many of them as possible the end of the presentations. We won't be able to get to all of them, I imagine. So we will answer as many as possible on the website and include them in the summary that we'll distribute. So today's webinar has been set up to broaden knowledge about the Construction Industry Culture Standard, which has been developed to operate as part of government procurement and has been trialled and researched over the past 2 years. So we're going to hear about the research findings to date, the experience in the pilots from contractors and delivery agencies. We're going to hear some observations from early adopters and our work on supporting implementation with guidance tools, and then what's next. Now, some of you will be very familiar with the standard, and I imagine there'll be others less so. So forgive us if we're not getting the balance right between preaching to the choir and assuming too much knowledge. I came here today to Barangaroo on the brand spanking new Sydney Metro, and it's a great example of the brilliance of the infrastructure construction industry that's delivered such incredible projects across the country, transforming our cities and our towns and delivering us quality of life. And yet, despite all the advantages of this industry, good pay, great people, teamwork, clear goals, being part of amazing city-shaping projects, we know that construction just isn't an industry of choice. We have an acute labour shortage. We know it's about 229,000 workers, according to the latest Infrastructure Australia data. And the consequences of that shortage hurt us all. It hurts the people in the industry, it hurts their families, it hurts productivity, it makes projects more expensive. And some of you would have seen, I think, today's Mercer table of jobs with the highest salary increases over the past 12 months. And most of them, 99% of them, are in the construction industry. So that cost, that financial cost, is quite compelling too. I think we've come to the point where we understand that doing nothing to address the settings of the industry that deter people from joining it is imposing an economic cost, decided quite conservatively at that number. So recognising these issues, back in 2018, the New South Wales and Victorian governments and the Australian Constructors Association set up an entity called the Construction Industry Leadership Forum, and out of that came the Culture Taskforce. The primary funding entities of the task force are those three bodies, the ACA, the New South Wales and Victorian governments, and their support over these years since we began has been absolutely magnificent. And the construction unions have played a very positive role, especially as we embarked on piloting projects under the culture standard, and you'll hear a bit more of that later. Other jurisdictions have now joined the task force: South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland and the ACT, warmly welcomed. And as you'll see shortly, the Commonwealth. Various delivery and policy agencies also sit around the task force table with us. A fellow called Jim Betts was the CEO of Infrastructure New South Wales back when we started, and one of the prime movers behind the task force and the development of the standard. So here's Jim, Secretary of the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communication and the Arts, with a few words for us. If the tech works, here it is.
Commonwealth Department of Infrastructure, Transport, etc. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person for the webinar today, but Gab Trainor has asked me to say a few words about my involvement in the Construction Industry Culture Taskforce and the development of the culture standard which you're discussing today. And for me, that journey begins back in 2016 when I was CEO of Infrastructure New South Wales, in the height of an infrastructure boom, particularly in the transport sector, which many of us have been hoping for and dreaming of for a long time. And that boom was arrived with projects like WestConnex, Sydney Metro and so on. And yet, rather than dancing in the streets, we were hearing from industry a whole series of problems around skills shortages, around cost escalations, around overheating in the market, and around problems with procurement. So a number of us got together to try to analyse how working together, industry and government, could make some headway and address some of those problems. And the skills shortages issue really emerged strongly from that. But what became apparent fairly early on was that the problem of skills shortages was really about deep-seated cultural problems within the construction sector. I remember early on a few early adopters, a few members of the Coalition of the Willing, Anne Austin from Lendlease, and I think Alison Myrams was there as well. And I got together, a number of us, in an office building in St Kilda Road, and discussed some of the cultural challenges that the industry was facing that was driving significant levels of gender inequality in the workforce. Only 11% of the construction workforce female, only 1 to 2% of trades. And the walls were lined with verbatim quotes from people in the sector, both male and female, about the inhospitable working hours, about the adversarial culture on site, about the crisis of culture within the sector and what needed to change. And it was a huge call to arms for us that led to the initial mobilisation of the Construction Industry Culture Taskforce, and people like Gabrielle Trainor and Diana Burgess coming on board to turn a problem into a solution. And that's very much the case with the culture standard, which has been thoroughly researched, thoroughly evidence-based, a collaborative effort across public and private sectors, across different government jurisdictions to get us where we are today. And I think back to that room on St Kilda Road in 2017, 2018, whenever it was, through to the meeting of infrastructure and transport ministers early this year, when Gabrielle Trainor presented the culture standard to those ministers to general acclaim, and a sense that government needed to get involved and to act and to use its procurement power to drive change within the construction sector by establishing a level playing field that enables people to be rewarded for doing the right thing in terms of driving progressive cultural change in our sector without being penalised at the tender box. So this is something that the Commonwealth Government is fully supportive of and signed up to. I hope you get a lot of value out of today's webinar. It's been a career highlight for me to be involved with so many fabulous people in the sector, trying to make the industry that we love a better one, which we can be really proud of. So enjoy today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, for those words and those messages. Very powerful coming from Jim in his position. And yeah, he's been on the journey the whole way. So just to ask and hopefully answer the obvious question, why do we need the culture standard?
Hi, everyone.
Well, we say, oh, there's Jim again. Hello. Back to me. We we say it's a product of three things: people issues, pipeline issues, and policy issues, some of which Jim has already touched on. It's not as though the people issues haven't been identified. If you see the middle band there, those statistics I think are familiar to everybody. The statistics on mental health, the statistics on women in the sector. The mining industry is doing a lot better than we are. The numbers are inching up, but I think to achieve anything like parity, it'll take about 83 years at this rate. We know the gender pay gap is in fact widening and is the worst of any industry that WGEA covers. And according to recent work, fantastic work by Infrastructure New South Wales and their Women in Construction program, and also the Building Commissioner of New South Wales, a very, very high percentage of people already in the industry are thinking of leaving. And the main reason for that is the working hours and the workforce pressure. So that the people issues are very alive, and it's not as though they haven't been identified for a long time. Many organisations like NAWIC, like Mates in Construction, have been doing great things for decades in some cases. Jurisdictions have set targets. There's been a lot of activity, but really the needle hasn't moved in any meaningful way. And in some areas we actually have gone backwards. The stats do seem to be stubbornly stuck, and focusing individually on diversity or separately on mental health just hasn't and can't deliver the change, where so often there's a race to the bottom on projects, to time and to cost. This middle band is topped by the reality of the pipeline, the unprecedented $230 billion infrastructure pipeline that we're facing in the next couple of years, and have, of course, had a massive pipeline, particularly in transport projects over the past few years. We know that energy and defence and social infrastructure projects are keeping that pipeline very, very well filled. It's not as though it's going to taper anytime soon, and that acute skill shortage is going to still be an enormous drag on the quality of life of Australians unless we do something about it. In the background, and I'll go to the bottom bar here, and a lot of this has happened historically, but some new initiatives since we began our work, that the regulatory and policy environment has changed, and we now have some real reasons for top-down compliance to be on the agenda at boards on psychosocial health regulation, on things like respect at work, on things like right to disconnect. And I think the policy environment has also changed in that a partnership approach is much more prevalent, and you see things like the National Construction Industry Forum that attests to that. So looking at all these issues, particularly the first two, people and pipeline, it was decided around the task force that we build an evidence base on which to develop a holistic and integrated standard, which you need to sign as part of procurement for the life of your project. And as Jim said, this does create a level playing field for proponents. It requires delivery agencies to lean in to be part of the solution, and to develop mutual accountability to ensure that the elements of the standard are met. And the aims of the standard in broad terms are that the evidence base is very important, but at the same time we want whatever has been developed to be achievable, practical, flexible, not unduly prescriptive, and uppermost that it will make a difference and hopefully ultimately be harmonised across Australia to reduce compliance and complexity costs. So what does the culture standard look like? I'm sure many of you have seen these Venn diagrams that Matilda's just about to put up many times before, but some of you may not have. So bear with me if I just touch on a couple of the high points without going through it in detail at the moment. But I think you probably all know or gather that it's a flexible framework for clients and contractors to address those cultural issues we've spoken about, to help make infrastructure construction particularly, but construction more generally, an industry chosen by more people. So these are the elements of the culture standard that we've been trialling. You'll find it on our website in any event to delve into the detail if you would like to, and that's cultureandconstruction.com.au. and as I said, the slides will be accessible to you. But you'll see that it's essentially 3 interrelated themes that consist of the standard: time for life, diversity and inclusion, and wellbeing. And all our research says that they need to be tackled together to truly make a difference. That's exactly what the standard does and has done in our pilots. So each of these themes includes specific requirements to be addressed by tenderers and clients as part of procurement. But having said that, there's very little that is prescriptive under the 3 headings. And when you get the chance to read the elements of the standard, you'll see that a lot of it is in the hands of proponents to actually comply with the standard in their own way. The one thing that is that we're very keen to make sure happens is the maximum limit on an individual's working hours. Now, it's a myth that the standard strictly requires Monday to Friday a work regime, or that it's all about mysterious women's business. As I said, compliance with the standard comes in many forms, and our pilots were very inventive in programming working hours, and on some Saturdays were available as they need to be for some projects, especially for horizontal ones. We've recently tweaked the wording on the hours standard to make that crystal clear. A site, if it needs to, can work 24/7, and it can also comply with the standard at the same time. The research shows not only that you need to think about culture holistically, but the most powerful catalyst for creating change is our requirement on hours for work and working days. That is the cap of 50 hours per week for any individual, with flexibility built in, and that's very, very important. Even better if the 5 days over the 50 hours is Monday to Friday wherever possible, with 2 consecutive days off for recovery. Now, we're acutely aware that the standard needs to deliver value, not just for our industry, but also for the investment of taxpayer dollars in our infrastructure projects. And we're also aware that change is not easy in an industry under significant time and cost pressure, and there needs to be a robust case for reform. But we're acutely aware at the same time that doing nothing differently and just working equally harder is becoming more and more untenable and really becoming a vicious cycle. I think the fact that you're all here today in such great numbers shows that momentum is with us and change is happening. For instance, the Commonwealth is asking jurisdictions to be accountable for requiring culture change on transport projects, for which it's providing support under the recently concluded federated funding agreements and the notes of administration. You'll hear later about jurisdictions who are already building the standard into procurements, and we've just seen, for example, Parramatta Light Rail 2 in New South Wales included in its contract the culture standard with John Holland. It is dawning on the industry that to attract and retain talent, we need to be much more people-centric and not regard people as units of production, only units of production. The regulators are demanding that of us in any event, and research, and there's a lot of it, into Gen Z ELs demonstrates their expectations of their workplace is vastly different from their parents, particularly once they partner. They want flexibility, they want weekends, they want balance in their lives, as well as values alignment. But by and large, they don't see this in construction. So just to reiterate, continuing to do the same is just not an option. And our pilot project, here they are. I think Matilda's going to just put the list up, show us that change is possible, practical and beneficial. And you'll see these projects are really quite diverse, horizontal and vertical projects, projects across New South Wales and Victoria with different contracting typologies. So they're the things that over the past 2 years we have been researching very, very thoroughly, and we have an interim report on those projects, which some of you may have caught up with, and we are preparing a final report as we speak. While seeing the full effects of the standard is a longitudinal task, there is some early, solid and very welcome news on our research agenda. As part of the program, we thought it was important not only to do the qualitative work, but also to complete a cost-benefit analysis. So we've had Frontier Economics working with our academic research team along the journey of the last couple of years. The the results, particularly of the frontier economics work, and this is a sneak preview, but so far it is showing that the standard, when applied, has a significant and measurable impact on worker retention. And the opposite side of that coin, of course, is attraction. If people want to stay on a site, they are obviously going to find the site a better place to work. We're also seeing that frontier economics have concluded that the studies so far demonstrate clear improved quality of life, and furthermore, there's no evidence of projects' costs or timelines being negatively affected. A lot of people, I think, at the beginning thought that there would be negative impacts in those areas on the cost of projects, on the time of projects. That's not being borne out in our study. You'll see more about that as we release our final report next year. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker today. RMIT has been leading a multi-institutional research team, which includes the University of Sydney, as I said, Frontier Economics, and the ANU. Professor Michelle Turner from the School of Property Construction and Project Management at RMIT started working on the program a couple of years ago, in fact 3 years ago, with distinguished Professor Helen Lingard. So Michelle has joined us today to highlight some of the latest findings as our final CICT report is being developed. So please welcome Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabrielle. Okay, 10 minutes, and I'm going to pop my timer on because I promised to stick to those 10 minutes. What I'll be doing is briefly covering the research method that we used. I'll present findings around preferred work hours and work schedule. I'll go over perception versus experience of the culture standard. I'll cover off work hours and work-life balance according to project progress, and then findings on flexibility, and I'll finish with gender diversity. So in terms of the research method, we used rigorous research design, where we collected data over a 2-year period. 5 pilot projects implemented the draft culture standard that included a mix of both vertical and horizontal, and as Gabrielle said, located across both Victoria and New South Wales. It was good to see that some of the horizontal projects undertook night shift and weekend work, which I'm sure you heard about from either Dean or Lizzie. We collected interview and survey data across multiple data points at each project, and we measured key aspects of the culture standard, which included wellbeing, time for life, and gender diversity. We followed 3 projects through to completion or near completion, and 2 of those included horizontal, which is a road project, and 1 is a vertical or a building project. Now, in terms of the interview data, I'm just going to very quickly flick this up. At the 5 projects, we conducted interviews at multiple points throughout the project, as you can see. And where possible, we asked our interviewees to participate in all waves to capture their experience over time. We also collected survey data along with the interviews at multiple points at all 5 projects, as you can see here. So again, that was just to show that it was that much a rigorous and robust research design. Now, if we look at preferred work hours, we used the last wave of data from the surveys, and we combine them to look at the preferred work hours. So what we can see here on the graph is that the majority of salaried workers, or 52%, and almost half of waged workers, 47%, preferred to work about the same hours as they worked under the culture standard. We can see 41% of salaried workers preferred to work fewer hours, and on the far right of the graph, we can see that 33% of waged workers preferred to work more hours than they were working under the culture standard. Throughout our research, our findings consistently showed that around about 30% of waged respondents wanted to work more hours, and income was given as the key reason why they wanted to work more hours. If we move on to preferred work schedule, our results showed that the majority of salaried workers, as shown in the red bar, preferred a 5-day week with weekends free. 60% of waged workers preferred a 5-day week with weekends free, and 11% of waged workers preferred to work a maximum of 5 out of 7 days. You'll see there on the graph that around, again, 25% of waged workers preferred to work a 6-day week with Sundays free, and a very small group of both salaried and waged folks preferred to work a 7-day week. We move into the next slide, which is perception versus experience. That's perception versus experience of working under the culture standard. There was some initial trepidation about the 5-day week from our respondents. For many workers, this was replaced with a positive response once they had experienced the benefits. And some of the benefits included 2 consecutive days for rest and starting work the next week feeling rested and refreshed. Workers had time to spend with their family and friends, and for a lot of our participants with young children, being more involved with their children was very highly valued. And for some participants, it was their first chance of being involved in the Saturday children's activities. Our interviewees also had time to participate in activities of interest, which had not been possible for one day off. And usually that one day off was taken up by rest and chores. And as you can see in the quotes, someone said you need minimum 2 days because one day you're spending washing and cleaning and you've got 1 day to relax. And a parent said 2 days isn't much when you look at it. The kids grow up pretty quick. It's definitely better working Monday to Friday. If we go to the next slide, again, I want to focus a little bit on perception versus experience. And the first 2 quotes really illustrate some of the initial trepidation associated with working under the culture standard. So, for example, our union leaders said, we weren't sure how our members would react, particularly some of the older members we thought might be against it. We were proven wrong there. The majority of them, once they worked on a job that was a 5-day week and they're at home on the weekend and there's no loss of money there, they were over the moon about it. And the second quote from a waged worker, when they first started talking about a 5-day week, I was a bit sceptical. I thought, I don't know how this is really going to work, but it genuinely is a 5-day week here. And so we've transitioned to it really easily. Once there was a better understanding of the benefits of working under the culture standard, some people were actively seeking out these projects. As shared with the supervisor, I've heard nothing but positive. I've had a few people come over from other projects and give you the pump. This job's great. I get lots of phone calls through the week from subbies and stuff who are like, when can we come over? It makes me feel good. We move into work hours according to progress. As I said, there was some concern that as the project moved into its final stages, that work hours would increase. So we followed 3 projects to near completion. And what we found was that hours were quite stable across different points of project progress. So, for example, what I've got here is Project A. The majority of respondents, you can see, worked 50 hours or less per week across the duration of the project, shown in the blue bar. And we found that this finding was consistent across all 3 projects that we followed. If we move to the next slide, there was some initial concern that as the project reached its final stages, work-life balance would suffer and hours were expected to increase. But in fact, our findings didn't show that. And the graph here just shows that work-life balance remained fairly stable at all of the pilot projects that we followed through to completion. We move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about our findings around flexibility and project schedule. What the findings showed us is that the culture standard is not prescriptive, and in fact, all of the 5 projects use different approaches. And we were giving each project feedback according to each wave. And as a result of that, some projects actually modified their work schedule midway through the project to improve their workers' time for life, rest and recovery. And this really highlights that contractors can customise their approach to suit the requirements of the project. It's not prescriptive. I won't go through that quote. I'm just mindful of the time, but a lot of our interviewees talked about how the project had really responded to some of the research findings and then taken a different approach to better support their time for life wellbeing. I want to also now talk about flexibility in terms of individual workers. At all of our 5 projects, formally initiatives were implemented, and some of those were 3x3 My Time Flexi board, and we'll talk more about that in our final report. There was also a lot of informal support for flexibility. So that was really a reflection of the culture that had developed throughout these projects. So it was absolutely quite fine to come in late, leave early, and working from home. So, for example, one of the interviewees said they did flexibility workshop a few weeks ago, and it was about how can we manage more flexible working conditions for everyone. This is also another really important quote. I think the biggest thing for me is the fact that people more senior to me get up at 4 p.m. in the afternoon and say, I'm picking up my kids from school today, got to go. And it's completely normalised. It's not hush, hush, hush. So when people use the flexibility that we have, it's nice to see the senior people doing it as well. So you can see that will change in culture. And I'll finish with gender diversity, and I think I've got 15 seconds. So most women felt supported by managers, and there was very clear disrespectful behaviour policies at all the projects. However, banter still did happen on site, which could be offensive, and some women put up with it because it was too hard to report. They didn't want to cause a scene. Amenity was very well provided, such as designated toilets for women. Some of the other elements, long hours during Monday to Friday, was still seen to be impediment for women because it wasn't aligned with childcare and school hours. Some sites have introduced specific measures, such as an employing a women's engagement officer and undertaking an internal audit pay parity. And finally, having women in leadership roles was really important because it showed other women that a career path for them in construction is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and to you and the research team who walked with us all the way through the pilot project, and the work on the final report is well underway, and I know we all look forward to that. Thank you very much, and please thank Helen and the rest of the team. So I'd now like to introduce a couple of people who've had the, as they say, the lived experience of projects under the Culture Standard. They're here to talk about their experience, and you'll hear from Lizzie Cox, and she's John Holland Project Director at Sydney Children's Hospital Stage 1 and the Minderoo Children's Comprehensive Cancer Centre for Health Infrastructure. That's a project that's ongoing. And then you'll hear from Dean Riha, who's Alliance Manager with Fulton Hogan on the Brunt Road project for the Level Crossing Removal Authority, which is now part of VIDA in Victoria, as we know. That project was completed earlier this year on time and on budget. So both will talk about how the Culture Standard, working under the Culture Standard, has uplifted their project and their people. So we'll go to you first, Lizzie. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gabrielle. So my name's Lizzie Cox. I'm a project director for John Holland, working across 3 of our health infrastructure projects. And today I'll be talking about the CICT journey we had on the Sydney Kids project. I'll provide an overview of how we commenced, the results, and the initiatives being rolled out. So in terms of the project overview, the project is located on the Randwick Health and Innovation Precinct. It's $658 million project value with 12-storey buildings. We commenced on site in September 2022, topping out this year in April 2024, and the completion will be late next year. Key client and stakeholders, the client's health infrastructure, and the stakeholders who will be operating the facility when it's handed over is the Sydney Children's Hospital Network and the Children's Cancer Institute. The peak workforce that we've had for around about a year is 550 people on site with 60 plus John Holland team members. So at the commencement of the study, RMIT conducted the initial survey, and it was apparent there were a number of key issues that we wanted to address through the program. These were grouped into three main categories. So firstly was long work hours. It was reported more than 36% of people were working over 50 hours a week. And this was due to a number of project nuances, including a significant quantum of design changes, project complexity and its bespoke nature, being a children's hospital, and it being in a live environment and the interfaces. So the project's actually sandwiched between two live hospitals, a light rail and another construction site, which obviously presents a lot of challenges. Wellbeing and time for life. So 68% of people at the commencement of the survey and the pilot project reported high levels of stress. We picked out a few key features. So it was balancing family and work life. So the majority of people on the project had kids, the vast majority, I'd say. Lack of flexibility due to project demands and pressures on site and having to be present, which resulted in the inability to be able to complete life admin tasks, individuals' health, so physical and mental, so not getting enough sleep, exercise or eating well, and generally industry burnout, so the sustainability of working in the construction industry. So coming directly off projects that were stressful or just being completed with no downtime for years on end. And finally, diversity, and the treatment of women. So we committed to 3% in trades with the mandatory of 2%, the government mandatory, and non-traditional roles of 4% with a mandatory of 3%. And some of the feedback we received from women working on site included standing out and feeling different, unwelcome banter, and the requirement to fit in. And although participants did note that this was nothing different to other construction projects, it was certainly something we needed to address. So the overarching approach to the CICT program, we centred around communication. We understood that by communicating the intention of what we were trying to achieve, we would naturally get the buy-in from those involved. So the key stakeholders we focused our communications on included health infrastructure. So we committed to them to being transparent, where improvements can be made and the results of the initiatives. John Holland, Senior Internal Management, so communicated the importance of the CICT and the commitment the team would have to invest in the initiatives. Probably most importantly, the commitment from the project leadership team, because these changes can't be made unless it comes from the top of the project. Communication with subcontractors. So discussions occurred with owners of businesses who had already provided fixed lump sum and programs and how they would make it work. And then, of course, communication with those on site. So what we were trying to achieve, especially as a number of people would be brought in for interviews with RMIT. So it was good for them to know what was happening and what we were trying to do. So I'll now just run you through a couple of the initiatives. So firstly is the 5-day working week. So our project was tendered on a 5-day working week. It's a preference for all of John Holland Buildings projects. It was mandatory. It was written into the contract, so there were no changes. And this was 2 consecutive days. So we had Monday to Friday. There were a small amount of people that reported a loss of income and others that were working from subcontractors working on other sites on Saturdays. There have been a few occasions where there's been challenges where the projects needed to accelerate to hit critical milestones. And when our out-of-hours work has been required, sometimes we've found it difficult to find people to do it due to commitments that they have on Saturdays or alike. And even when time in lieu is offered, people don't particularly want to do it because they enjoy the time off. So all in all, the results for the 5-day working week, there's been vast majority in support, increased productivity, and probably the most important thing is improved relationships. So people highlighted the importance of having personal time on the weekends with family and friends when they're off and when schools are closed and daycares are closed as well. So the next one was reducing initiatives around reducing working hours. So we tracked the hours people were doing on and off site. When we understood what streams people were doing too many hours, we increased project resources, the number of people, and we introduced flexibility for life, so offering time in lieu, early starts or early finishes or half days. Throughout this time, probably the most challenging thing was communicating with the teams and individuals as to how this would work. So we really needed to have one-on-one conversations with people to understand how their needs could be best met. So there were a number of people who had kids that were doing soccer on a Wednesday, so they finished and had a half day on Wednesdays, and they did 12-hour days either side. So it was about making it work for the individuals. Again, the feedback was received was extremely positive and centred around productivity because people were feeling more well rested, not doing so many hours. Individuals really appreciated the bespoke approach that we took and the health and wellbeing associated with it as well. Onto health and wellbeing now. So there's a number of items and initiatives that we rolled out for health and wellbeing to try and hit the mark and make people feel, I guess, better at work and better at home. So we looked at doing skin checks, we did skin checks, vaccinations, hearing tests. We had wellbeing champions on the project who were trained mental health first aiders. We offered healthy food options in vending machines and improved site amenities. Some of the challenges that we had was because it is such a compressed site, we were limited as to what we could do in terms of enhancing the amenities. It was also quite time consuming for a lot of the John Holland people to implement some of these initiatives and to track the initiatives. But the results were, again, a resounding success. People were saying we were investing in our people. It was a better working environment, and there was a lot of reduced personal leave that was not only reported through John Holland, but also through our subcontractors. So the next item was diversity. So we're lucky enough to have a female participation advisor on the project who's funded by the Department of Education, and she's run a number of initiatives, many initiatives. Casey's done a fantastic job of undertaking subcontractor forums to obtain buy-in and commitment to increase the percentages, partnering with schools, universities, employment agencies and TAFE to increase education and to obtain free training and access. So some of the challenges we had was finding women who were trained for the specific roles, where we were finding that behaviours could be curbed and banter could be decreased. We ensured that there was correct communication. So in site inductions, toolbox talks, individuals having one-on-one conversations and workplace behaviour training so people understand what is appropriate and what is not, and to break the unconscious bias of what's acceptable. So the results that came back were women showed clear improvements in behaviour and respect. A lot of both male and female, well, predominantly male actually, the comments that came back was there was more diversity of thought, improved in new ways of doing things on site, and acceptability for everyone that they have family commitments. So increasing the number of females on site has meant it's more acceptable for their male counterparts to also have time off to look after kids and meet the commitments. And then finally, the final initiatives we rolled out was in and around team building. So we've had many team building activities on site, not just with subcontractors, but also with health infrastructure and the stakeholders. We've invested in a significant amount of money for team camaraderie. We've raised over $150,000 for charity, and we've had representatives from the Sydney Children's Hospital and Sydney Cancer Institute come onto site and express the importance of the building in which they're being delivered. So I think it was really great to be able to prioritise how we would celebrate our achievements. But again, finding the resources and the time, this was quite time consuming organising the events, but luckily we have a lot of people in John Holland that put their hands up to undertake these tasks. So the feedback again it created purpose and drive to succeed, team camaraderie and positive feedback that we are investing in the community and living the John Holland values of caring and future focused. So in terms of the evidence that was provided, most of the data that we received was from Survey 2 that was undertaken in August 2023. So that was generally at the beginning of the project, and the final survey was done in February 2024 of this year, where things had really ramped up and there was a lot more pressure on site. And despite these pressures, we received 15% increase of work-life balance satisfaction, 7% increase in enjoying life, and an 8% increase in managing their work-life balance. Reduced hours, we had 36% of people previously doing over 50 hours a week. That was reduced to 12%, 17% over 55 reduced to only 7%, which was great. So generally in terms of health and wellbeing, people felt more optimistic, useful, relaxed, coping and being able to solve their problems. And diversity, the commitment of 3% trades, we've hit 6.5%. And non-trades, the commitment was 4%, and we've now hit 8.3%, which is a fantastic result. So I think just in summary, to wrap up quickly, because I'm just cognizant of time, that the initiatives have been a resounding success, and it's evident that the culture change is possible, and it is possible to deliver to projects on time and on budget while prioritising people's health and well-being. You can see a number of the quotes there, which you may read through, but generally, yeah, all positive feedback and really great recognition and praise from external parties visiting the site. So I'll hand over to Dean now. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to put my timer on as well, because otherwise I'll definitely overrun. My name is Dean Riha. Until recently, I was Alliance Manager on our level crossing removal program, and we were privileged enough to be part of the culture standard when we lobbied pretty hard back in late 2022 when Brunt Road was just kicking off. The project itself is a level crossing removal. It's on the Pakenham line, which is in the suburb of Beaconsfield in Victoria for us. A design and construct project, circa $60 million project, two-span bridge. Importantly, as Gab said, the project finished on time and on budget. So two good things to start with, whilst we ran the culture standard throughout the whole process of Brunt Road. So given the limited time, I'm going to focus on time for life and our diversity outcomes. So I'll just start by running through the time for life side of things. The way we tackled the 5-day working week, 50-hour cap as part of the culture standard, as people have already mentioned, was probably different across all the pilots, but the way we did it was the one that's highlighted yellow there, scenario 4. Just quickly looking at scenario 1 is our baseline, what we'd normally do in construction, I guess 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, with in Victoria at least, with a Monday RDO every 2 weeks. Our solution was to run a Monday to Friday in week 1, have an RDO for the Monday, and then run through a Tuesday to Saturday for the week 2. I guess that for us maintained pretty much the standard conditions from an EBA perspective. It kept the same RDO numbers, the same leave provisions, predominantly the same calendar. The key stats in doing that time for life change for us, really, if you focus in on, I guess, the 2 or 3 numbers there, the total hours paid. There's a lot of talk around, I guess, the blue collar workforce, more hours, more pay. But simply by rejigging our calendar, the blue collar workforce only lost 70 hours of pay per year by moving towards this scenario 4 versus scenario 1. So very little loss in pay overall the course of a year. And again, from a productivity point of view, probably the most common question we get around productivity. Again, scenario 1 to scenario 4, we're looking at 34 hours, circa 30 hours difference between our revised calendar and what would have been a standard construction practice. So I would argue that 30 hours lost over the course of the year is negligible anyway, and that you're not losing productivity. But what we did, just to satisfy the loss of the 30 hours, was we built in a week of night shift into our TOC. Night shift and Saturday, same cost, so no cost differential between either option there, and effectively we mitigated those 30 hours lost through the course of the year. So zero prolongation, zero cost difference. And, the big takeout from all that is every single person on the site now worked 21 days less in a calendar year. They're all working, the 50-hour, 5-day weeks every single week, the same RDOs, 21 days less per year, and getting equivalent pay if you're on a wages side of things. So I don't think you can argue there's much negatives to that side of things. The other things we did in conjunction with that time for life side of things is we were very cognizant of the change and make sure that people didn't lose any of the other flexibility they had. So we maintained our flexibility plans in place, the individual flexibility plans. We maintained people that were working a Monday to Friday roster because we closed our sites on the RDO. So we made sure that people weren't encouraged to turn up or they weren't missing anything. If they wanted to work from home or work from our head office on that Monday where the site was closed, they could do. So someone like an accounts payable that would not normally have worked a Saturday could still work a Monday to Friday, maintain their 5-day work weeks and the 50-hour cap with that flexibility in mind. So just flicking on now to, I guess, the results and I guess what our teams were interviewed with. As Michelle touched on, we had 4 rounds of reporting. We had the same core group of people that were interviewed throughout the process. We've got a really good story through that data. And I guess the takeouts for me, when I look at some of those survey results and, trying to condense down the two takeouts in 10 minutes, is that at the very last survey, 100% of our staff said that they preferred the 5-day working week as opposed to the normal construction period. The wellbeing results were up, the diversity results are up. Our blue collar workforce, again, there is still that group that want more hours, more pay, but the vast majority of people in that blue collar workforce also said that they preferred the 5-day working week under the culture standard. So very positive results from those surveys. And I think the other takeout that, it's not there is, but at the same time, the Vic CFMEU undertook their annual survey during the life of Brunt Road, and 87% of the blue collar workforce supported a 5-day working week as long as they could maintain the same or similar pay as what they could, and the modelling shows that. So I think a lot of support on site and a lot of support throughout the blue and white collar workforces. Just flicking on now to, I guess, some stats from the Time for Life. As Lizzie said, we took a little bit of a view as well in tracking fatigue hours and trying to understand our white collar and our staff hours, probably predominantly because we've got a lot of data in the blue collar workforce through pre-starts and the like, and a lot of procedures and systems around that already. But by actually delving into our white collar workforce and tracking hours on a daily basis, we set up a system where alerts were triggered through to direct managers when anyone worked more than 60 hours. And we had an alert warning system at 55-hour cap. And this was back in the early days of the Alliance several years ago. When we introduced the culture standard, we wound back those warnings to that anyone working more than 55 hours a week, their direct manager would automatically get an alert, and anything greater than 50 hours was also a warning system. And that warning system was reviewed by the AMT on a fortnightly basis. So really what was happening was that there was significant support from a management level to make sure that people's hours were getting monitored and people weren't working excessive hours. And if they were, digging into the reasons behind it and how could we help adjust those hours. So looking at the results of what that actually meant over the life of the Alliance, if we can just flick to the next slide there and tilt, there is actually really positive results from that. So, the takeout from this graph is simply that back in 2021, we had around 20% of our people doing greater than 50 hours. We had nearly 4% of our staff doing greater than 60 hours. You wind the clock forward to the 2023 period and there's basically no one doing greater than 60 hours. There's 4% of the people doing greater than 50 hours. So again, it works. We haven't finished anything late. All our works are on time. Everything's happening as it should do. And we're managing our hours. And it's just been a continual process of changing that culture and actually driving a discussion point around fatigue and managing hours. But it certainly is something that works. The other thing that we look at throughout our Alliance was the engagement survey, how people are feeling and how they're, relating to the flexibility on the job. And just quickly, during that same period, our engagement scores have gone from 74% in 2020 through to 78 in 2022, and then 82% engagement, which is 13% above industry mark throughout that same period. So it may be a coincidence, but certainly with the concentration of the culture standard and hours, it's certainly reflecting in the engagement survey and also in our flexibility questions. So, when we go from a question of I am able to arrange time out from work when I need to, we started at 82%, which was actually below industry average. And, we wind the clock forward to the same period here in one of our latest surveys, and we're at 89% and 6% above industry average. So again, all the data is telling us that it's working. Just quickly moving into the diversity inclusion space, again, we didn't just take on the culture standard for Brunt Road. We used that as our formalised pilot project, but we took the decision, that we could see it was going to work. And we've rolled out the culture standard across every single Alliance project that we're running out there. And that's resulted in some really good stats in the D&I space. Nearly 60-40% split from a male-female point of view. We're not quite at the 50-50 mark yet. And we've got some work to do in the job families in squaring up the equality there, but certainly a really good start and certainly a lot better than what we were when we started the Alliance. And again, importantly, we look at the ALT and the AMT representation from a female-male representation. It's some really good senior female people involved in our Alliance. We thought we'd do a really quick comparison back to the BEP, Building Quality Policy from a Victorian perspective. In short, we would have met if we were tracking this at the stage. We did some back calcs. we would have met all the targets except for the apprenticeship hours one. We would have actually fallen 80 hours short. So that's given us a bit of a heads up that we need to focus in on female representation at an apprentice level. But otherwise, we would have far exceeded all those targets. And the two take homes again for me, female representation across the project, 21% versus the industry standard of 12 to 14, and 8% on the ground versus that 2 to 3%. So again, the stats are showing that it's working, and that by running this culture stand, you certainly end up with better results. So I'm not going to read all that, and I was going to sum up by saying we're mad if we don't all get on board. You get a better culture, and those three pillars of time for life, better wellbeing, and better diversity and inclusion. Who doesn't want that? And I don't see why we couldn't just roll this culture standard out across every single project. Thank you.
Well, if anyone was sceptical about the benefits of the culture standard, I think hearing those two presentations, you would have to abandon any doubt. I just can't thank Lizzie and Dean enough for their great presentations, but moreover for their incredible commitment to really taking this on and embracing it. And I'm so pleased but not surprised that the results have benefited both firms and all their subbies to the extent that they have their great presentations. Thank you both so much. We've now got Brett Martin, who is going to quickly talk to us about the experience of the culture standard from the client point of view. He's project director on the Mulgoa Road project in the west of Sydney that Seymour White are working on. And I think Brett was going to share with us just a few observations that he has about how that project's going under the culture standard and how it looks from the client point of view. Thanks so much, Brett, for joining us.
Thank you. So my name's Brett Martin, Project Director of Mulgoa Road out here in Penrith. Mulgoa Road's a really interesting project. It's only 1.1 kilometres long, but it is valued at about $218 million. We don't have any bridges. We don't have any major earthworks. But what the culture standard delivered for us was a really high level of commitment very early on. So as people came on the project, they felt like they were welcomed. They became part of the overall team, and they became really interested in getting the outcomes we were looking for. Because of the constraints of the project and being so small in length, we had a lot of really challenging startups. We saw a lot of resilience from all the members, particularly the younger members of the team, who remain committed to it. Our overall retention of staff on this project has been brilliant. We didn't have any significant turnover until 18 months into the project, despite the fact we'd spent that 18 months setting up and doing utilities. We've only recently started pavements. The line between client and the delivery ops, because we are an alliance, is very, very, it's almost invisible. One of the advantages of having the 50-hour week made it a lot easier for us to integrate the two teams. So I have staff working on traditionally more contract-aligned roles, but they fit in easily because they can start later and still match finishing times with people. And that has, again, assisted the culture on the project immensely. It's been noted by a number of people who visited the site, just the cleanliness of the site, the pride people take in it. And again, that commitment and connection that each of the teams have. All of the things that have been talked about already have happened on this project. We've had a considerable number of people take paternity leave as part of their outside life, and there's been, there's no judgment. People regularly finish a little bit early to pick up children, but there's also a committed culture in terms of gym work and a lot of things where people feel like their outside life can, work around or be part of the work life and the work family really easily. So it's been really positive, and particularly that ability to retain people and get them committed on such a challenging project has been a huge advantage to us. I unfortunately didn't start a timer, I should admit. We are now moving into a new phase where we're getting to do pavements. We are pushing longer closures, and we're focusing on that, still trying to give people 2-day breaks. We've always had night works. We're one of the projects that's had night works consistently throughout this. And again, we've been able to maintain a commitment to giving people, longer breaks or sufficient breaks, minimising the amount of crossover and the maximising of hours, which has been a huge advantage, again, to us and our ability to react to our stakeholders and our customers adjacent to us, which is our biggest issue. We're directly in the middle of a residential neighbourhood trying to do a quite noisy work, is the only way to describe it. So, and what we're seeing now is, again, a newer group of people coming in and taking advantage of that culture and realising that this is a team. This is almost a family of people that are committed to getting this done, and committed to some things outside of just good quality work. It's the getting a durable product in the end, but also minimising how much interruption we do to the people around us and to fit in with developing everybody else's lifestyle as well, and trying to make sure that this is a project that everyone remembers.
Brett, thank you very much for those thoughts, and thank you for your leadership. Transport for New South Wales has been a tremendous advocate, and particularly your minister, Minister Halen, is a great supporter of what we've been trying to do and a real leader. So we thank you and thank the whole team at Mulgoa Road for doing what you've been doing under the culture standard and finding it so positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I should just remind people, if they do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We're monitoring them and looking forward to saving some time at the end for question time. But before that, we've got a couple of other speakers giving different perspectives to our work. And the next is a person who's really a pivot of the work of the culture standard. Both she, Diana Burgess, Melissa and Matilde and Maddie, I'd really like to shout out. They're the people who day to day work on advancing the program, and we couldn't do it without them. And they're all volunteers from their firms. Well, their firms have very kindly volunteered them. So, Lauren, I'd like to invite you as project manager to talk about the implementation phase of the culture standard, because I think we are now coming to a stage where we do understand the tenets of the culture standard, but the rubber hits the road when you're actually trying to deliver it. We've heard about that from these previous two speakers, but tell us the work that you're doing to actually produce some tools and guidance about how you actually can deliver the culture standard. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Gab and I are together.
Thank you. There we go.
Okay. Sorry, some technical glitches there. So thanks, Gab, for the introduction there. I'm Lauren Hosking, the CICT project manager, and have the pleasure of working with speakers on the call today. So with our project pilots now complete and our research work being finalised, we've moved our focus towards implementation and adoption of the standard. So this phase of work largely has two focus areas, and they are the continued engagement with jurisdictions nationally to support planning for the adoption of the standard, and also the development of support materials and resources that are really aimed at providing practical guidance, information and access to best practice examples. And these support resources are designed to be available to both client and contractor size, and organisations of all sizes and types. So following my presentation, we're going to hear from Hannah Clement, who's the Group Head of Civic Infrastructure at Development Victoria, and Gillian Garrity, Director General and ACT Chief Engineer at Infrastructure Canberra, which is formerly Major Projects Canberra, and they'll talk to their adoption of the standard. So a little bit more about the development of the support materials and the resources that we're preparing. So under this work stream, that we recognise that the how of implementing the standard is of equal to the what, so of equal importance to the standard. And we're really trying to ensure that industry and clients are both well supported in the adoption of the standard and have access to guidance, implementation and best practice resources. So to undertake this work, we've formed an implementation working group and a series of sub-working groups who've brought together representatives from across governments and industry, which continues in the CICT's collaborative approach. And these groups have been tasked with the development of a series of implementation outputs, which you can see on the screen there. So in addition to this work and through our working groups, we've engaged a series of subject matter experts to ensure that these outputs are both highly relevant to the sector, but they're high quality in nature. So we've continued our work with RMIT through this work stream, and we've recently engaged Wellness in Infrastructure to support with our wellness resources alongside the University of Sydney and the Australia Centre for Gender Equality and Inclusion at work. So just looking to the slide that's on your screen there, you can see that we're delivering a series of action plans and toolkits which are aligned with three key pillars of the culture standard. We're also designing a project culture survey and a dashboard and a guide that's aimed at being administered to a project workforce to continue how we track a workforce experience with the culture standard, and that information and those data sets being available to projects via a dashboarding system. And we believe that will be a really useful tool in the monitoring of the standard. And lastly, there we've developed a measurement framework. So again, centered around the ongoing tracking and measurement of performance against the culture standard. One of the key things that we've kept front of mind in the development of these resources and across our implementation focus is the importance of having the culture standard be adopted in alignment with existing practices. We know there's a lot of great work, a lot of jurisdictional policies that are interrelated with the culture standard. So very much is the intent that these resources complement that operating environment, and also that they can be applied across a diverse range of organisations. I've seen a comment in the chat there about the consultant land and the need for support and resources for different parts of the sector. So we're really targeting that for our implementation resources. So these implementation resources will be released alongside the final version of the culture standard, which we're tracking towards early next year. So that's the summary for now. I'm going to now pass over to Hannah, who will then pass on to Gillian for comments about their adoption of the culture standard today.
Thanks, Lauren. And nice to meet everyone on the call that I haven't met before. Hannah Clement. I'm here with Development Victoria. So we're a medium-sized delivery agency here in Victoria on behalf of the Victorian Government, and do a lot of work across government with other parts of government that don't do major capital build all the time. So not a lot of roads and prisons, but a lot of art centres and sports stadiums in my space. And I guess that lends us to a culture that's very passionate about wellbeing and diversity inclusion within our own space. And so to quote Dean's words earlier, it felt like a no-brainer to lean into the CICT piece as we take our responsibility of how we work with industry, and I guess how we work with industry in a partnership in terms of moving things forward into an area for improvement. So in that vein, we decided to give ourselves a 12-month trial where we have included the CICT in every one of our major tenders, which for us is over the $20 million mark, out to a variety of sort of civil but also commercial and vertical build type contractors here in Victoria, really to see how the market responded. So it was an option in our tenders, and we are using this really to sound out, I guess, how well known the standard here is in Victoria amongst our particular set of builders that we work with, which does straddle sort of tier 1 down to the tier 3, and explore with them around how we might work and be a good client in terms of working in partnership with industry to help move things forward. Interestingly, so we're in the middle of this trial, so we're still sort of working our way through it. We've had a really interesting response. Pleased to say, out of the 11 tenders that we're assessing at the moment, or all but 9 gave us a 5-day working week as the standard. The remaining 2 gave us an alternative tender offer that did allow that. So we're really pleased at seeing a strong adoption of certain elements of the standard. What this is also allowing us to do, because here in Victoria we've also got the building equality policy, which has mandatory targets around gender numbers at trade and at managerial levels. And so some of the work we're doing is mapping through the culture standard and the building equality policy so that we can hopefully harmonise those 2 activities together and really build on each other and leverage some of those brilliant initiatives coming through. what we are seeing is there was a lot of contractors that hadn't seen the standard, and this was probably the first time they'd really engaged with it in terms of the tender process that we're seeing. But we did have a couple that had been involved in some of the trial projects as well, and probably that maturity and that exposure came through in their tender responses. Pleased to say, I think we're very close to at least adopting the CICT on one, if not more, projects in this 12-month period. And then really the goal for us is to reassess about whether this is something we just bring on board and adopt as a standard way of work, or something we'd like to continue as, I guess, as a select option, whether there was contracts that were more suitable or not. Obviously, Lauren and I are really in touch, because obviously very keen to understand the implementation tools, because a lot of what we're turning our mind to now is what does it mean as a client agency in terms of administering this? How are we going to work with our construction partners to work through this, but also looking at how we can share the ideas and innovations that come through this process in a really collaborative way, both internally but potentially through our different contracting partners that we might be work with in terms of laying out the standard. And likewise, is there things that we could be doing as a client agency before we get to procurement that would ease the path in terms of contractors coming in at a tender period and coming through with propositions? So there is structures and systems or arrangements we can put in place, as we do with some of our other policy social procurement, other policy requirements that we aim to achieve. Just in terms of things we're also looking at, is really looking at how we celebrate the wins, and a bit like today, some of the great successes we've seen on some of the pilot projects. How do we continue to elevate and communicate what is being achieved on site and how it is being achieved, and how we're shifting these goals, not just at the end of the jobs, but along the journey, so we can share that with our industry partners and across our networks. Also looking at how we communicate about the standard in a much more interactive way to our network. So we're looking at some events, particularly with parts of the industry we work with a lot, but also looking at how we help people communicate about the standard down to their subcontractor level. We do find certainly the information to date has been very lead contractor heavy, and perhaps a bit of a gulf between them and stepping into the subcontractor level as well. So lots of opportunity for improvement, lots of opportunity for us to learn, but certainly excited by some of the feedback we're getting from the market, and really looking forward to seeing how some of our pilots roll out over the next little while. I think on that, I'm going to pass over to you, Gillian.
Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everyone. My name is Gillian Garrity. I look after Infrastructure Canberra. We had it renamed last week from Major Projects Canberra. We are the delivery works agency, so for infrastructure and for property for the ACT government. Very excited about the Culture and Construction Standard. And I think the main driver for us is we're a small jurisdiction, and not only is that means that it's much easier to apply the standard, but what we find is that the projects that we're delivering usually contain the people of the community that we're delivering for. So we want to look after our people because we want to look after our community because we're delivering them great projects. So we've looked at this in a slightly different way, where we just want to roll it out. And so we've got an opportunity of our two major projects that are currently in procurement, which is the new North Side Hospital project, which is $1 billion investment for a hospital on the northern side of Canberra, and the Canberra Theatre redevelopment, the stage 1, which includes a new lyric theatre. They are in early contractor involvement procurement, and we've asked both of those in that procurement to respond to the Culture and Construction Standard and how will they adopt it in the project. So looking forward to seeing those tender responses and seeing how that plays out. We also have a major project with the delivery of the light rail stage 2A with our Canberra Metro, who's a delivery partner, which includes CPB and John Holland. And we've asked them to post-tender award, post-contract, to how can they now adopt the culture standard to make sure that they can also deliver on the initiatives that we've seen. So they're the major projects. The smaller projects that we're delivering, we're now working with our local industry over a 12-month period to understand how can we ensure that we do have a consistent approach, and making sure that we continue to look after our people on our projects and for our community. I would like to thank our government. The Chief Minister here and the Minister for Transport in particular have been phenomenal supporters, and it's a very progressive government to give us the support to not only do it on a couple, but to do it across the breadth of it. So we are very excited about how we continue to work with our partners, both industry in terms of delivery and our consultants, and how we can make this work for Canberra and the ACT. So probably the only other thing I wanted to add is that the measurement tool that Lauren talked about, we're actually looking at how does the measurement tool come across all of our projects, and actually provides a really proactive indicator of what's happening on projects. So in terms of we measure safety, we measure time, we measure cost, but this is also how we measure culture. So we're doing that already on 4 of our projects, and it's really showing some great indicators about how we can make sure that we're a step ahead of any issues on any projects and making sure we continually deliver great outcomes. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Gab, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Gillian. And thank you, you and Hannah, for being at the forefront as you are. It's wonderful to have the ACT involved too. And I think the ACT's been a real trailblazer with the wellbeing framework that applies across the territory when programs are available. And this way that people have collaborated and shared their learning, shared their experience. And I think people have been working so hard on these implementation tools is a great example of what we can all achieve, learning from each other and coming up with some really innovative solutions. Again, thank you both for your experiences, and good luck, Gillian, with the projects, and you too, Hannah. I know we'll be staying in touch. So we've got a little bit of time for some questions, and thank you for the people who put some in the chat so far. But if anyone has anything that they'd like to ask, please don't hesitate. Now's the time. One of the questions, and I suppose it's probably one that everybody asks, particularly after hearing from Lizzie and Dean, given their experience, is why aren't people doing this? Why hasn't it been done a long time ago? It just seems to be a no-brainer. So I suppose my theory is that there just hasn't been the bandwidth in the industry to do it. The pressures just mount up, and I think clients have been traditionally a bit more fixated on time and financial cost of projects rather than necessarily thinking about the overall economic cost. But I think that light bulb has well and truly come on now. And I think there's an innate conservatism in any industry about just the way we've always done things, particularly given that the construction industry demographic is toward an older profile. I think people think, well, if it's good enough for me to work on Saturdays, it's good enough for everyone to do that. I think it is hard for people to get their heads around a new way of doing it, but clearly from the presentations you've heard, once people do, they find enormous benefits in it. So that's my theory, but I might ask Dean. Dean, why do you think people haven't been working this way for a very long time, particularly on the working hours? As we know, there have been initiatives in the other areas going back a long way, but the working hours has just always been such a big sticking point, and yet we know that's the one that is the real catalyst.
Yeah, I think the feedback I've got, I guess, and probably the apprehension, the questions that continually come is really around that productivity question. And I think until you do the research and you delve into it and you look at the numbers, and the reality is that there is very little loss of productivity over a course of a year. And when you actually look at ways to mitigate that, there's probably a number of ways you can do that. And I think that productivity question is always there across the industry anyway. So I think part of it, I think, is that fear of change and what that means for productivity. And then I think the other question I get a lot is really around that blue collar workforce and the take home pay. But again, the culture standard is not about dictating a a solution. It's about giving people flexibility. So I think there's different ways to attack that. And if the blue collar workforce does want to work more hours on additional works, then I guess that's their life and they can do so. So I think they're the two pillars that seem to come up in my questions the most. But yeah, certainly, I think when you get there and you experience it, there's no turning back.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, certainly you are a very strong advocate for experiencing the culture standard, and as you said, you don't know why everybody doesn't do it. I think the fact that governments are beginning to require this in procurement is a great step forward, and I think the industry is under enormous pressure. We know that, particularly with the smaller subbies and the lower tier contractors. The head contractors are well resourced. They've got HR departments. They've got a level of sophistication. The beauty of requiring the culture standard in procurement is that it has to begin to cascade down the supply chain, and that's where it's most needed, frankly. And I think that's where the needle can ultimately move. But it's hard work. There's no doubt about that. We had a question that I might direct to Lizzie, which is, and I think I referred earlier to the fact that there is somehow a perception that this is all about women's business and it sits over in that compartment over there and it's not really about everybody. But Lizzie, the gender diversity initiatives that you put in place on the kids' hospital, I just wondered whether there was any backlash. You hear a sort of pink fatigue and people getting annoyed that women are somehow being treated differently. I'm wondering what your observations were about that, or the person who asked the question is wondering, and so am I.
Oh, look, I think definitely not. I think one thing that was really interesting with the survey results was just in and around the support from male counterparts. Certainly the males on site enjoyed having more women there as well. And as I said within the presentation, then the males felt that it was also acceptable to leave early to pick up kids and to have those sorts of family commitments. So all in all, I would say no backlash at all. Only really positive feedback.
That's that's very good to know. I think that is so important that these are regarded as initiatives for everyone, and everyone supports them, and everybody benefits from them.
And it's very interesting because a lot of the women just say we're just women, we're not different people. We're women, we're people. So it was really, and this is society, 50% men, 50% women. So it is actually just making a more normalised workplace.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. There's another question that just asks the very obvious one about what are we going to do next to get the word out a bit more broadly. I mean, it's fantastic to have several hundred people on the webinar today, and I think over the journey, over the years that we've been involved, we've done hundreds of presentations and conferences and meetings to try and get people familiar with what we're trying to do. But I think now we can take a much bigger step to really cross the jurisdictions now, being able to step up the communications effort, even though we really operate on a very lean and mean basis. But I think I should talk about the plan for launching the final report, which we've talked about during the course of this webinar. It's very likely we'll be able to do that in February after the holidays when people are back. And we really do want to preface that with another round of consultancy and engagement just on the final shape of the standard. We've made a couple of small recalibrations already to it based on the experience. So we want to be able to present not only the final report of the research team and Frontier Economics as an integrated product, but also the implementation tools and guidance notes, and really make that very broad communications effort in the new year. So we've got some people working on some big plans to do that. But the more people follow us on LinkedIn, the more people like you, all of you who are here today, becoming advocates for us, telling your colleagues, telling your friends, and we will be trying to show this video and the video of this webinar and an edited version of it across the jurisdictions, particularly to the the politicians and the ministers who've shown interest in this. I think that's very, very important. We also want to get private sector developers and the housing sector a bit more interested in this. You know, they don't always have the procurement lever that governments do, but just the elements of the culture standard itself are proven to have very positive effects. So we have had a few inquiries from some of the big developers and big private infrastructure providers. So we do want the word to cascade right through not only the jurisdictions but ultimately through the industry. There's no doubt about that. So that's the plan ahead. But you know, I'm treating you all as ambassadors now for the work that we've been doing. So hopefully this is a step up in spreading the word. I think there was another question just before we wrap up. What advice do we have for where to start? Are there any key lessons learned that are helpful to know? I think probably Dean, you again might be a good person to just talk about you know, where do you start? How do you start thinking about this? You've got to get together with your client, obviously, but you know, where does it go from there?
Thanks, Gabrielle. I think that's right. It's the communication piece again, and I think when we first, you know, our lessons were when we first started having a chat with stakeholders, be it the client, be it the unions, be it the workforce, be it a subcontractor workforce, we thought that there would be some, you know, potential pushback or some concerns or challenges, but you know, we quickly learnt that by having through those conversations that there was actually zero pushback, and every single person we spoke to was more than supportive and willing to jump in and do what was needed. You know, when we went and presented to the union, they were fully supportive and backed the result. The LXRP as a client couldn't have been more supportive and, you know, trying to push us to keep doing it and to challenge the status quo. And you know, the workforce was on board. The subcontractor supply chain, when we went out at Brunt Road, we were still lobbying, so we put up two options to the subcontractor workforces: standard construction processes and timelines and calendars versus a 5-day calendar, and said, can you give us a price difference? Again, thinking that there was going to be a cost impact for us going down this, and not one contractor came back with a cost difference. So I think again, there's a lot of fear and a lot of questions that come to mind when change is out there. But once you actually jump in, you do your modelling and start talking to all the stakeholders involved, I think a lot of those disappear pretty quickly. So I think, you know, my advice would be to probably just to jump in and start having those conversations and just see where it leads, because it's probably a lot smoother than what we thought it would be.
Thanks, Dan. And hopefully that's wonderful advice. And I think hopefully our suite of tools, implementation tools, based on your experiences and the experiences on the other pilots, is going to be, you know, a really foundational piece of the toolkit that will help people not be too daunted by applying the culture standard, both on the client side and on the contractor side, and you know, further down the supply chain. It can be done. You've done it, and you've done it successfully, as have the other pilots. So there is a way. I think we can probably wrap up the questions there, but we will, of course, answer any that we haven't been able to get to in this session, and thank everybody for supplying those questions to us. You'll probably go away and think about plenty more, so please don't hesitate to get in touch with us through the website. I think it goes without saying that we strongly believe that our work and the outcomes so far and the broader momentum around us means that the time has come for the culture standard. It's not so much a matter of if, but it's when. The pilots are, you know, you've heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak, that these initiatives really make a difference. They really move the needle. And the snapshot, the sneak peek I gave you of the economic study to show that retention is very positively affected, and quality of life is very well affected by the application of the culture standard. I think these things are the proof of the pudding that we just keep needing to keep our eye on and convince decision makers and influencers in the industry that this is real and it will benefit everybody. The industry nonetheless is staring at, you know, some massive challenges still. The pipeline's breathtakingly large. The labour and skills deficit is even bigger than it was. we've almost got to replicate the current workforce again to try and meet the infrastructure pipeline when you consider the energy transition, defence, social infrastructure needs. You know, the platform is still well and truly on fire. We're pretty sanguine though. We know that to really reform the way people think about the industry and the accessibility of the industry and interest in the industry, it takes a whole suite of things across society. It's not just the silver bullet that we can try and dream up. The culture standard is certainly a part of the solution, but when you think about you know, STEM subjects at primary school, when you think about the education system more generally, you think about availability of childcare, you think about digitisation, you think about skilling the future workforce. All these things come together in what is a very complex recipe and many complex policy levers and work that need to be done to bring the whole picture together. But we think the culture standard has a very strong part to play in repositioning the industry, making it more attractive and providing a much better environment for our people and for many more people. It's not going to be a static exercise either. I think as time rolls on, and this is what we hope, the tenets of the culture standard will become what is business as usual. And I really look forward to being done out of a job when the culture standard is no longer required, that everybody just takes this as a matter of course, that this is the way we behave in our jobs and these are the things we put in place. So before I finish, I do have a number, well, probably an overwhelming number of people I want to thank. So bear with me just for a moment. I'll try and be brief, but nonetheless, I'm very heartfelt in my thanks to the ongoing support of our funding partners. The ACA, Victorian and New South Wales governments have been our primary funding partners, and we've had another couple of agencies who shall remain nameless for the moment, who've also kicked in very generously to our work. Our research team is magnificent. You heard from Michelle, and you'll look forward, I know, to our final report. But the hundreds of people who've been involved in the pilots, probably, you know, it must be close to 1,000 in some respects, and the commitment of the firms and the agencies who've taken it up. The speakers today, thank you very much for your time and your dedication to the standard, the role you play. Our task force members, thank you immensely. All have contributed over these years and will continue to do so. With their wisdom, their expertise, and the sharing and the collaboration has been absolutely extraordinary. And the industry bodies and agencies who support us more broadly. The ACA members who've donated resources that I referred to before, in the people like Lauren and Di and Maddie and Matilde. We couldn't do it without them. Thanks to this webinar together. They've all worked really hard to put you know, a big exercise on air today. So Matilde, Megan, Claire from the ACA, all our member advisors from New South Wales and VIDA and beyond. And as I said, I'm relying on you all to spread the word across industry as you did for soliciting participants in today's webinar. So please tell your friends and keep in touch. Visit our website, go to LinkedIn and stay tuned for our launch. We'll welcome you very much to our launch of our final report later next year. Thanks again for everybody's participation, and I'm sorry I've run 3 minutes over time. Goodbye. See you soon. Thank you. Keep up the great work all.